podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Smaranda Dochia, and this is AI, Ethics and Trust in Coaching, a new series exploring not simply what artificial intelligence can do, but what its growing presence asks of the coaching profession. People are already turning to AI for reflection, guidance, accountability, learning, companionship, and help making sense of their lives. These are deeply human conversations, many of them taking place in spaces once associated primarily with coaches, mentors, educators, and therapists. So the question is no longer whether AI will affect coaching. It already is. The more urgent question is what coaching is ultimately here to do, and what kind of profession we now need to become. To open the series, I am joined by Dr. David Drake, pioneer of narrative coaching and the 5 maturities, whose work spans human development, systemic change, adult learning, and the future of coaching. In this wide-ranging conversation, David challenges us to look beyond the familiar coaching session, beyond the debate about humans versus machines, and even beyond our attachment to coaching as we currently know it. We explore AI as a mirror for the profession, the changing ways people seek support, the need to reinvent learning and development, and why the future of coaching may depend less on protecting our methods and more on becoming wiser, more discerning, and more fully human. David, welcome. Thank you for being here with me today. I'd like to start this conversation somewhere a little bit deeper than AI.
Okay.
Our series is about, we'll have a number of conversations, but we're talking ethics, trust, responsibility, human development, and the future of coaching in a world increasingly shaped by intelligent technologies. But before we talk about technology, I'd like to talk about coaching itself.
Okay.
I guess the first question for you would be, what is coaching actually here to do?
I think in the beginning, coaching was a way of bringing transformative and even therapeutic conversations into the workplace or into entrepreneurs. So it was a way of sanctioning that level of conversation. It grew out of a period in American history in particular that was very aspirational. And so it was meant to sort of accelerate people's development so they could achieve what was important to them. And it's obviously since grown to become much more than that, but that's sort of, to me, where it began.
Yeah, thank you for that. I did an intro about you, but for our audience to get to know you better, and I'm sure many of them already know who you are, what has been your journey around coaching?
When I transitioned from my first career, I recognized that I was bringing with me a very unique systemic understanding of change, all the way from doing funerals and being a grief counselor to working with large social movements, to helping organizations bring about the changes they wanted. And so I just found and that we often don't really understand the human process of change. And so when coaching came along, this was 30 years ago, there weren't that many, if any, coaching books per se, but we were getting organizations asking we need better conversations. And so we built some very early stage manager and leader as coach programs, and I found them very effective. But then about 5 or so years later, I finished my PhD and I said, well, now what do I do? And then I realized, though, in the context of that, through some serendipitous occurrences, that what I was offering had 2 very unique features in coaching even then. So my first degree was in sociology. So I find that one of the limitations for many coaches is they think individually as opposed to systemically. And so we brought a contextual lens to coaching. The second thing is that oftentimes coaching ends up being sort of methodical or tied to a method or an orientation. And I wanted to offer a way of thinking about coaching that was much more natural and human. And so I decided to take my research from my PhD and create narrative coaching. And it basically uses people's actual stories in the conversation to help them find a pathway to the changes that they're seeking.
And coming up to today, what are you up to?
Too much. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of technology and humans. And I've done that I helped Nike solve a global supply chain problem when their technology initiative failed, not because I understood the technology, but because I understood patterns, stories, people. And I basically used my own narrative inquiry methods to help them understand themselves and to see culturally where they had missed the mark on some of their designs for the project. And so AI obviously is the technology du jour. And so I'm involved in 3 different startups in the AI and development space, but not because, again, I'm an expert in AI. I have no interest in that, nor am I even that I'm fascinated by AI, but that's not really why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because we're trying to figure out what can we do with AI that's actually generative for human beings, both personally and collectively. It's easy to get wowed by it and we're afraid of it. It's just a tool. A hammer can help you hang pictures on your wall, or it could be used to damage something. It's just a technology. So for me, one of the most important roles AI plays is as a mirror to ourselves as humans. And so it amplifies good and bad about who people are and what they can do. And so part of our ethical responsibility as coaches is to use AI as a force for good. But in that, I find it just really fascinating because one of the things I think I'd really like to offer to this call is I was having a conversation with a colleague that we're working on a project together. One of the elements that came out of my dissertation was this idea of projective spaces. And it borrows from Jungian psychology. And in that, coaching is often seen as a dyadic encounter between a coach and a client. And that client could be a team or a group, but a client. And it's this, but it's a triangle with the context. And so in the language that I draw from it, we think of these as third spaces. So I'm not that interested in the debate about AIs versus humans. I think it's a false debate because, for example, there's biases in humans, just as there's biases in AI. So we're not immune to some of those things we complain about AI. If you look at it from the third space, almost as an outsider to an AI-human conversation, what would you notice about both of them? And so just a couple of simple things that I think are really important to remember. One is that oftentimes AI fails because we're gluing it onto or using in the context of old school thinking. So we need new pedagogy. So in my new book on the 5 maturities, I actually developed a new theory of learning and development that I think is much more around collective wisdom and much more fitting to our time. The second thing is that we don't do anywhere near enough to help users be better critical thinkers. So when AI gives you something that's wrong or incomplete or even dangerous, it's easy to blame AI, but it's doing exactly what you prompted it to do. And so if you don't like the output or you complain about the output, which is fair enough that that's the case, the more important reason is why were you not clever enough or discerning enough to realize it was not useful in the first place? And so AI is not going away. It has its share of significant issues. And to pretend like it's not there is not going to be helpful. And so I think even if we removed AI tomorrow, it will have pointed out the fact that most of our education systems do not develop good critical thinkers, good relational beings, good curious participants. We build our schools like factories. And so it's no wonder that AI creates disruption that way because it's actually challenging us to be better thinkers. For me, I tend to only use AI for things I already know a lot about because then I'm going to be an effective participant in that conversation. And so in my new book, I created 3 new terms for the field. And I argued in each case for over an hour with Claude on each of them about why they thought this was a better term and why I thought this was a better term. And in 2 of the 3 cases, I actually opted for Claude, but because it made more sense in the end, because I knew enough about the word choices and the philosophy to be able to really think through which one actually makes the most sense to me. So I feel like AI is this extraordinary opportunity for coaching to, in many ways, completely reinvent itself.
Thank you. There is so much in there. And I was just thinking, you mentioned learning and development and how this is changing.
Yeah.
I was just in a conference in the last couple of days, and there was one presentation that their main slide was kill the training. We need to reinvent all of that. And then another speaker came a little bit later and said, don't kill the training, have people trained around the right things that we need them to learn right now. So for instance, it's about using any kind of AI tools. People are using this without having any kind of clear awareness, literacy in this and so on. They just go about using it as they find fit, which has sometimes huge implications for the companies because data is being thrown into AI and there are no clear guidelines for most companies. So there is a level of reinvention when it comes to L&D as well, training in general. We're speaking about coaching a lot in our case. I'm wondering for our conversation, what's the pattern that you see here in where we're going with all of this?
Well, it's really interesting. So again, one of the hallmarks of my work is we focus a lot on context. And so in terms of where we're going, so I saw like a LinkedIn post yesterday from a guy that I have a respect for on trying to make training more effective. And he had this whole thing, like this 30-day plan to change behavior. But it involved like dozens and dozens of all these actions and who's going to build all this stuff? And it just feels like we're like trained monkeys. Like we need this prompt and that nudge and this tool and that. And I said, if you think about in our own private lives, things that we care about, I want to be a better French cook. I want to learn how to be a better parent. I want to learn wood carving. We might need classes to help learn the basics, but we are inspired. And so we go out of our way to go find YouTube videos and things to help us. And I think in the workplace, we have this notion that if we just pushed hard enough that people would change. I don't do training anymore. I haven't done it for over a decade. I don't do leadership programs anymore. I find them not useful. And in part, it's because fundamentally, I don't understand how adults actually learn. Like I said, we're stuck in this industrial model. And so I think one of the roles that AI is going to play and play usefully is force us to reinvent all of that. And so there are places where pedagogically content is useful. Like if I'm training chefs for my restaurant, hypothetically, I want to know, do they know which end of a knife to hold? There are some basics you can introduce people to, but beyond that, that's not how most people learn. I've given a simple example. I had a technical issue with our website a couple of weeks ago. Involved 4 different vendors. I tried for like 2 hours going to each vendor. They each blamed the other vendors and I gave up. I just typed the scenario into Claude and within 10 seconds I had a solution because it was able to pull from all 4 databases of these 4 companies and tell me what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Then I needed to have the basic knowledge about how to implement that, but it did all the thinking that I would have spent me days to try to figure out myself. And so I feel like what's going to come is that we've built a world that exceeds our capacity to be in it in some ways. Most of us are overwhelmed and exhausted to varying degrees. Most of us, our old approaches to developing ourselves are not adequate. We feel like we can't do enough, and yet we keep churning out more offers to people. And I feel like we're going to move towards sort of more of a minimalist approach, where we're less focused on content, less focused on stuff, less focused on fads and trends, and just say, like, what are the elemental things I need? What is the simplest way for me to get good enough at that or to be in relationship with other people about that? How do we harvest the collective wisdom of the communities we belong to? So I feel like we'll move to these sort of learning and development ecosystems, and that will, I think, replace a lot of the commodity-focused ways we think about that now. And so what that means for coaching is that it may be a bit of a digression, but I feel like the coaching session will reduce in significance. I think it will be reserved for intense conversations that require that level of focus and duration. That most of what people need are going to be smaller interventions across multiple modalities in real time around real issues that they're facing. I just give you a simple example, then I'll stop. And I think so then there's a distinction then between coaching with a small c, which is a set of activities and a mindset, and coaching with a capital C, which is a professional practice. So my girlfriend is wrestling with issues related to her aging mother. So she called and she was trying to run by some things she was encountering on her visit. And she knew I had some background in this space, so I have some extra things I might bring. So that conversation was maybe 7 or 8 minutes, but I could take a coaching stance. I could listen with a coaching mindset. She didn't need an hour. She said, these are 3 things that I'm really struggling with. What should I do about that? And so we held space while she sorted each of the three out. And then she was done. She hung up and went back to working with her mother. And I feel like that was a prototype for where I think this is all going. And it's going to require us to think about how we package what we offer to our clients.
That's very interesting from the point of view of where the coaching profession is going, but also what people are getting used to having in terms of immediate answers. Yes. So we've spent quite a few years on social media where everything is shorter and shorter, faster and faster, enormous amount of content, hard to pick yours, so to say. And now with AI, where you get immediate response and advice type of response to any question you may possibly have, people are very quickly getting used to that comfort in a sense, which is not what we're used to doing when it comes to coaching, right? Harvard Business Review did again that research last year. They published it as well with where most people are using AI. And last year already we were looking at this, that a lot of the advice around career and development and so on, that was quite on the top of the list. And now it's still like the top things are including companionship, learning, reflection, finding purpose, organizing life, professional or personal growth. So people are turning to their regular AI platform, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever they are using for all of these things. It's very quickly. It's a very interesting conversation, I find, for the coaching profession. What does that mean for us? Why do you think so many people are already doing that, turning to AI for conversations around purpose, reflection, personal growth? These are such human conversations, after all.
It's interesting. I think for a lot of people, it's the loss of friendships, loss of sense of community. And there's sort of, I think, again, if you use AI as a mirror, I just was reading a research piece yesterday about 20-year-olds and how they view the future. And it's pretty bleak for them. And so I feel like a lot of things that would have given us meaning, like in terms of a career or a progression or something to be involved in, isn't as present to people, but we still have those human needs. I think some people are really swept up in the instancy of all that. You see people like on the bus or even like on their bike here in Amsterdam, watching stuff on their phone while they're riding their bike, or no one's talking to each other much. They're just staring at screens. Again, I think part of our role as coaches is, do we do that ourselves? Can we model more humane ways of engaging with the world? Can we help sort of break those habits in people so that they are more equipped to deal with the real world, IRL, in real life? And then to, I think, help people build infrastructures, emotional and supportive infrastructure in their life to address some of those things. My partner could have done a search for those three dilemmas, and she probably would have gotten a reasonable answer from one of the platforms. But she knows me, she trusts me, she knows I have background in this space, lived background and professional background. She knows that we're both in this stage of life where we have aging mothers. And so she knows I'm in this as well. So I have a personal stake in this in a way that Claude does not. I've got a big birthday on Sunday. She'll be there next year. And so it also then brought back into our lives conversations about ourselves. Where do we want to be when we're 90? And so it creates sort of an ecosystem of relationship, of learning, of development. And it's not even so much a measure of time. If I have a technical problem, I don't want to spend an hour. I want 5 minutes. I want an answer and I'm going to be done so I can move on. But it's not about the measure of time. It's about the experience of time. So like I said, our conversation yesterday was 7 or 8 minutes, but it was quite luxurious in how it felt because it was two humans talking to each other in a way that we often wouldn't find with AI. The challenge that there's sort of the gauntlet, if you will, that AI has thrown down to us is to help us to be able to make ourselves better humans.
One of the things that this triggers for me is if coaching is fundamentally about human development, and as you're mentioning, you're not going to have those conversations with AI. You can't think together, how will you be when you turn 90? This is going to be a different kind of conversation. So we're speaking about coaching being fundamentally about human development. What responsibility does the profession have when developmental conversations are increasingly happening today through technology?
So again, if we just step outside the literal framing of the question as this involving technology. So humans have always relied on others to help them. Ancestors, relatives, friends, trade unions, teachers. So there's nothing novel about getting help from other people. So the fact that it comes from a technology in some ways is not that different. It's just a different form for what we've always done. What's different about it is that it's often done in isolation. So like I have a friend whose partner uses his AI agent to do a lot of his problem solving in the relationship, which is fine at one level. But then for my friend, he's now bothered. But what does that mean for us if we're losing our capacity to do that for ourselves? And his partner's actually outsourcing the challenges in the relationship. And so for me, I look at if we just hold the highest purpose, like we live in a world that's in trouble at so many levels in our lives, in terms of our careers, in terms of our ecosystems, in terms of just a lot of the lesser of the human values are really running rampant around greed and anger and ignorance and all kinds of things. And so if we're going to hold the higher purpose of coaching, at least for me, which is to elevate the human potential, then for me, I'm willing to use anything that helps me to do that. I'm often an early adopter, but not a zealot. So I don't get all in on, AI is going to save everything and it's going to fix everything. No, I use AI very selectively for things for which I know it's designed. And I take just a simple, practical example. So when we used to do a search, like with Google, we would just get reams of crap and then we have to sort through, like, what is all that? And mostly then what we got to the top were the people that paid money for ads, right? So then in Google then, in those days, they were making, I think I read once in a book, $84 billion in revenue from advertising, from our searches, and 90+% of which was profit for them. So we're not getting accurate information. Now that AI is woven in, we still have to be discerning. And I'm sure there's still ad issues in the background, but I feel like I get a much more comprehensive, a much more thorough answer than I would have gotten before. And so I look at that, okay, so our search function is improving. I still have to discern, do I believe this? Do I trust this? Does it make sense for me? Did I ask it the right question? And so I feel like in the old days, you would have gone to your grandfather or the village priest or shaman, or you would have gone to the elders who would have gone to them for advice. So in some ways, we're creating sort of modern day versions of that. When we're young and when maybe more naive, we believed everything those people said to us. And even though it might have been their own mythology more than anything, but I think we're hungry for guidance. We're hungry for meaning and sense making. And so I think rather than trying to contort our interfaces with AI or worry so much about AI, I want to help us equip ourselves as coaches, but also our clients to ask better questions, be more curious, have harder looks at things, because we need a lot of interventions, openings, awakenings that now. And we're not going to do that if we stick to how we thought of coaching before, because the world in which coaching was born, like when I started, does not exist now, and certainly does not exist for my 25-year-old daughter. And so we need to me personally, stop being so parochial about coaching and so precious about coaching. It too was a disruption, right? It disrupted psychotherapy. It disrupted multi-level marketing. It disrupted all kinds of things. And so now it's going to be the recipient of other disruptions. And I believe that the people that cling to what coaching was will fade out in the marketplace. I also believe that people that overindulge in AI at the expense of humans will also not do well in the end. I'm hoping they won't. But the people that figure out how do we develop the humans we need now, I think those are the ones that are going to thrive. And I'll give you just a really concrete example for the listeners. I think a huge opportunity for coaches is, going back to something you said, to convene small groups of people, either in your neighborhood or at your school, in your company, and the whole purpose of which is to process the things you've been experiencing with AI privately. And so if you look at one of the positive things I see about AI, so I do a lot of work with a company called Ovida. They used a lot of my research to build the platform. What we've observed for our students when they practice with Ovida, that they all are petrified of seeing themselves on video. That remains the same. But what we notice is that because there's no human on the other side of this, it makes them actually braver to practice, because the AI doesn't care if they look bad or they feel dumb. And so we find that people, once they get over the hurdle of seeing themselves on video, actually find great value in the platform to be able to try things. And so if we get people to try things, which is the pathway to all growth, then I think that's a huge win. And so I think there's an opportunity for people who have been practicing on their own, like trying out a new way of communicating or a new way of representing themselves or a new way of pitching their work. And they come to a group, here's kind of where I landed. What do you all think of this? And get some reality testing from other humans. Or I've been working in these conversations with my platform for some time and I'm still stuck. I can't figure out why I'm not changing. Well, then you can use a human coach to kind of go deeper in a way. And often it's not because the AI couldn't do that. It's because they didn't know how to ask it. And so I think if we see AI as a mirror, as a dialogical partner, as a resource, then I think it will be quite helpful. But that requires us to think about coaching in new forms.
There's a lot in there that you got me thinking. A lot of the coaches are desperately trying to hold on to what is human about coaching. Let's keep that so that we don't lose the nature of coaching itself. I was mentioning this to you that at the conference that was around technology and coaching, people were clapping the most when somebody on stage was saying, well, let's keep coaching human and not giving into the technology aspect of it. So there is a lot around that conversation. And listening to you now, what I'm thinking is that there is an entire educational piece that needs to be done. There's the awareness, but there's the educational piece, which I think it's normal because for any kind of technological change, for any kind of change, you need to have that conversation, awareness, educational aspect of what does this mean for us and how do you implement and all of that. But this is moving way too fast. And people are overwhelmed because they're kind of bombarded. There's a hype around AI and all the bombarding things around. You need to learn how to prompt this. You need to learn how to use this platform, that platform. Now switch from this platform to the other platform. Now the other platform is better. And like there's all of that is creating an additional overwhelm on people who are just trying to navigate this entire new aspect of life as well. And when it comes to coaching, I'm thinking what actually coaches are really trying to protect from their profession, so to say. What do you think?
I can appreciate that. If technology is not your thing, this can be certainly very overwhelming. But for me, I don't feel any overwhelm from AI ever because I make conscious choices. It's not part of my life. When I need something, I go use it and I'm done. I don't have a scarcity mindset where I have to keep hunting around and figuring out all these things. And so I think for all of us as coaches, what is your purpose? What are you trying to do? What really matters to you about your work? We live in a world that feels less human altogether. We're killing each other over our religions, over our beliefs, and we desperately need to find ways to remember we're on the same planet as a common species. I mean, it's understandable, but it's also, and I'll say this very gently, I don't mean it as harshly as it sounds, it's irresponsible in many ways to ask those kind of questions for too long because it misses the fundamental questions of what's happening in the world. And so in the book, I talk a lot about one of the major distinctions about coaching, say 3 to 5 years from now, that around how it will be different. I was at the New York University Conference on Technology and Coaching a week or so ago, and Rebecca and I did 2 sessions on the future of coaching, and ours was the only breakout room that was sold out. And what we found with our opening question, which was, what is it you believe about coaching but are afraid to say out loud? It was stunning. It was unanimous what people were saying. People are hungry to be freed from a lot of the constraints of coaching that are really just not useful. So most competency models, most old school things about agenda setting and all this stuff that was from a completely different time. And we need to be more robust. We need to be more systemic. We need to be much braver. I think we'll end up with hybrid professional roles that are part therapy, part social work, part consultant, part coach. And like for me, in my world, I don't even call myself a coach anymore because it's such a tiny box. There's some clients for whom that's the primary role I play. But in a given conversation, I'm always asking myself, what does this person need most right now? And which of my hats can I put on with integrity that will be of value to them? And so if I come from that place where I'm confident about what I believe in, and I'm confident about what I don't do, right? So I have discipline and integrity around that. Then I will encourage my client to use AI in any way that's going to be helpful to their journey. But for me, if we come back to coaching is just a form. And like all forms, it comes and goes. It'll be replaced by things that come after it, just like it replaced things that came before it. And so the beauty of coaching for me historically was it gave a whole bunch of us that didn't really fit anywhere a job to do, a community to belong to, a set of practices to bring to people that has been extraordinary in the world. And so if we hold dear to that mission and that purpose of liberating the potential in human beings, whether there's one of them or 10,000 of them, and to me, it doesn't really matter what it's called. And coaching, I think its time has come for a refresh. The word might go away. In the book, I recommend or suggest a word that may replace it, but it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong about that. It's just like AI is, I believe its gift in the end amongst many. It's challenging us to rethink who we are, what we do, and to recognize the world is very different now. And most coaching schools have not caught up. They're still teaching, and to me personally, outdated ways of viewing about coaching that are not evidence-based enough and not reality-based enough. And we need to be, for me personally, out in the mix with people, not always cloistered away in our coaching spaces. If you ask the young people, they need things we don't have yet. And I think the gifts of so many that came to coaching is rather than think only about our sessions, think about how do we act as a larger force for social good.
Yes, I like that because it is challenging. Just the fact that we are having all these conversations.
Yes.
This is already, it means that something out there came to challenge the profession and the purpose of it all. And I think it's humans that are asking these questions.
Yes.
It's not AI pushing us to ask those questions. What is actually coaching and what are you all about? And, what is the impact you're creating? It's not that. It's us asking ourselves these questions. So that already means that we've been challenged and we're challenging each other on this, which I think it's an important refresh. And maybe it comes to the level of maturity that you are speaking about. So I guess that is the question. What kind of maturity does the coaching profession need right now?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. In working on the book, again, part of it is encouraging ourselves to be more courageous and more creative in how we engage with AI. There was one point when I was working on a lot of the serious things about language choices and philosophical positions, because it has access to so much. It was very helpful as a thought partner. I've got different friends that could have called for different pieces of this puzzle, but then I've got to find them and make an appointment. And there was a point in that where I was sort of fatigued of all the heavy lifting I was doing in this conversation. So I just prompted it to have a little humor. I said, I'm kind of over coaching. And I just basically was very flippant. I'm so sick of coaching and coaches, and I want to move on to something else. And based on what we've talked about for the last hour, what do you think I should do instead? And I just asked, in a very provocative way, not because I seriously wanted an answer, but because I wanted to get some more levity. And I actually pushed it to the point of almost having it be preposterous. But again, because I'm grounded in who I am, I've thought about these issues for 30 years. So obviously not everybody's had that luxury, but rather than feel like I'm now have to surrender my coaching to AI. No. AI just sits there. How do you want to evolve your coaching? And how do you want to evolve yourself for the world that we're in now? And how can AI help you? And so I find that if you're really serious about it, that AI is an extraordinary provocateur. And then what if it isn't right? It doesn't matter. Even if it's wrong, it still can provoke you. And I'll compare where it is now to where it started. So when ChatGPT first came out, in the first few days it came out, of course I wanted to try it. I said, I have a dilemma that I would like some coaching for. What would David Drake have to say about this? And it wrote back and said, there is no David Drake in coaching. And I thought, okay. And then it came back, and eventually I asked it a few days later, a few weeks later, as the database was built, and cited some articles I'd never written. So that was where it was in the beginning. I think some people are still comparing it to where it was before. Now I find it so sophisticated and so nuanced, and it operates at a graduate level. Does it mean it's always right? Of course not. Just like your professor is not always right. I guess my invitation for your listeners, Smaranda, is cut your consumption of content at least in half, if not more. Cut your chasing of lots of things you think you're supposed to have in half or more. Spend way more time developing yourself spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And I would add to that, learn how to think with discipline and criticality so that you can ask higher level questions of ChatGPT. If all you want is, what are the 3 best remedies for a hangover? Then fine, just go ask it that. It'll tell you, right? And then you're done. But if you want to say, I'm noticing that my clients are bringing more existential issues. I don't feel equipped to answer them, but I'd like to be helpful. where should I begin on that journey? And it will come back with some suggestions. So then it might help you even pick a couple. And these days, it's most of the time pretty right. And in some ways, it doesn't matter if it's perfect, if it gets you started to go back and read Sartre or Camus or whoever you're going to begin with to go on that journey, because you said, oh, I just need to kind of understand that world and how I might be helpful. And so we're in this time of extraordinary transformation / collapse. I'm not sure which side's going to win, but I think both are happening concurrently. And so again, our growth as ourself, we're not going from point A to point B. We're going to point A into the abyss or into the unknown, which is, again, what coaching is all about. Certainly it's what narrative coaching is all about. And we have to think about how we engage with AI very differently. Yes, there are times when you're just getting a discrete answer or some suggestions, but I think its higher use for coaches is to ask much bigger questions, because that's the world that we live in now. And so we've got to think very differently. And so I primarily use AI now to help myself advance my thinking, advance my sort of state of mind, and to begin to imagine what would be helpful for the much more complex issues my clients are bringing. And for that, I find it invaluable. It's one of my overall mottos in life. When in doubt, treat nouns as verbs. So don't treat AI like a noun or a thing. It is, but that's not useful. Treat it as a verb. It's a dynamic interface that you can get great value from as a companion in your thinking, a companion for your growth, and a lens on how the world is shaping up. And so I think that will be very helpful to all of us in terms of how do we need to evolve ourselves, evolve our practice, and maybe even evolve beyond coaching.
Beautifully said. I love what you said about the need of cutting a lot of the things that we have, that information flow, the content that you're being offered at all times. It just doesn't allow us the time to even think ourselves or think critically or discover anything from within. For coaches, in all the conversations that I'm having with coaches, that fear, that's the power you have. You're speaking about keeping it human, yes. And if people would go back to the basics and ask those challenging questions and cut on this abundant information flow, what remains there, and having those conversations then with another person and going deeper and then having the transformational moments, that's the core of it. And I think at this stage, from a responsibility perspective, there is that education piece, that awareness piece that we were talking about earlier, because the generation that is coming, like our kids, the young people, this is natural to them. We're still thinking in the terms of what was and how it was before, the before and after. We're still having those two perspectives, whereas our kids are just going to have it as a given and a must in a sense, because it's just there. So you're going to use it. So you're already getting all the information from that. And the question around developing that critical, like the things that you are saying, well, I'm not using it in this way or that way because I know very well what I know and what I need. And I'm just challenging myself around the information that I already have. Whereas for people who don't have any of that information, what does it mean for them? And I think it's an interesting role that we have as well around what's trust and human judgment and what role they play in a world where the information and advice are increasingly abundant.
I had this discussion with a colleague of mine at a conference in New York, and he was going on and on about how he's using AI in so many clever ways to organize his life and his business and automate so many things. And part of it's, he's not even half my age, maybe. So he's of a different generation and he's kind of starting out. So the need to build an effective business is more important to him than to me. But also, again, the value of critical thinking for coaches. So I asked him, how is it that your life got so complicated that you can't even manage it by yourself? Yes, you can optimize, but then you're just churning out more stuff. People don't realize that, which then your system turns out more stuff. Then you have to get more advanced systems. And then you end up in this gigantic flywheel that's sort of, I find, never ending. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be more effective and make good use of our time, but you get in this, again, mechanistic thinking. This will solve my problem. No, just every solution creates new problems, right? So if I had one wish, it would be that in developing coaches, that we need to expose them to a much wider set of disciplines. So they become, for example, philosophers. They become ethicists. They become sociologists. They become anthropologists. because we need to think of our clients' journeys and our clients' stories in much, much richer contexts. And if we atomize the sessions or the exchanges through technologies, we lose the rich nuances of being human and what humans need from us. And we end up thinking about our clients in a very transactional way. But I'll give you like a very simple example of what I feel is coming for coaching. And I was coaching a woman executive some time ago, a very accomplished person, really liked working with her, a great client. Always came prepared. I had a clear desire for the session. And she showed up one day just looking like a wreck. And so, of course, I had to ask, so what's going on? Like, what's happening? And she wasn't all that old. So she said, my mother died unexpectedly earlier this week. So I'm just in shock, but I've got huge deliverables and I'm trying to deal with my family of origin and I'm the oldest of my siblings. And so now they're looking to me to do all these things. And so I asked her a classic coaching question. How can I be of most use to you today? And then she felt a bit sheepish. And she said, well, I'm sorting out with my team how to manage things while I'm away for a while. But what I really am most worried about is I've been asked to organize the funeral. She said, I don't go to church. I've been to a couple of funerals when I was younger, but I don't know anything about planning them. But everybody's looking to me to do that. And I said, it is your lucky day. I used to do them for a living way back when. So she's like, wow, cool. And so we spent the entire hour planning her mother's funeral. We wrote out the outline for the eulogy. We picked her mother's favorite music, helped her identify a venue, talked about the structure of how they tend to be organized. And then we talked at the very end about kind of her role in that, both logistically, but also relationally in the family. When I tell that story, half the room gets, that's not coaching. And I said, that's an irrelevant question to me. It's a completely irrelevant question. I'm not interested in what you think coaching is. I'm interested in serving a human being who has high needs. That's my only obligation. And with the fact that it doesn't sound like what you think coaching is, doesn't matter.
I would argue, sorry to jump in, but I would argue that was a very human conversation.
Yes, exactly.
In the right moment, the right time for the person who needed that.
And because I have background where I could, with integrity, offer that. So for me, I would say I would include it under the umbrella of coaching. And even if it's not, it's I want to free us to bring all of who we are to our sessions. One of the maybe more valid questions was, but the company is paying for this. I just smiled and said, okay. And I didn't challenge that false assumption or worry. And then I shared the rest of the story. And I said, when she came back to work, maybe 2 weeks later or something after her bereavement leave and taking care of a whole bunch of things in the family, we had another session. And I said, well, how would you like to spend your time today? And she shed a few more tears when she talked about the funeral. But she said, you know, this was one of the funniest lines ever from a client. She said, I learned more from 2 weeks of managing my family in grief than I ever did from any of the fancy leadership programs they sent me to. And she said, I'm more compassionate now. I'm more patient with my team. I have much more recognition that we all have personal lives that sometimes are not going well. I put a lot of the raw stuff in the company in a more nuanced perspective. And she said, I'm just a way better leader now. And she was already, I saw as one of the best I'd ever worked with. If we look, again, going back to what I was saying before, the higher purpose of coaching, to help other human beings evolve to become better human beings who can then lead or support or do whatever they do with other human beings, or help a team of human beings be better together. And I think that if we come with our attachment, I'm a coach and I'm doing coaching, we've already centered ourselves far beyond what we should. And I'm not interested in arriving as a coach. I arrive as David to other human beings who have names. And then together we figure out how can we create value for you in this conversation? And what roles do you need me to play to help that become possible? And in that, there may be roles for AI even sometimes. And you look at, like, for example, doctors. If you talk to most physicians, the amount of actual doctoring they get to do is actually less than it ever has been, because most of their time is spent with bureaucracies and insurance companies and all kinds of technologies. And what they went to medical school for, it seems less and less available to them at times, which is why a lot of them are frustrated. And I fear that sometimes when coaches get too attached to coaching, they move away from the purpose that we had in the beginning when all of this started. And again, I look at one of the ironies of AI is it may bring us back to ourselves and the roots for why we were doing this in the first place.
Thank you for that. That is refreshing to hear. As a way of closing, David, we spent quite a bit of time together. As you know, this conversation opens our series around ethics, trust. We're going to touch around health, mental health, AI literacy, governance, probably regulation, the future of coaching, the inevitable conversations at this stage. I just wanted to hear from you if our listeners carried out one conversation with them throughout all those interviews and the episodes that they're listening to. What question would you invite them to keep asking?
It would be something along the lines of, what is my higher purpose for why I do what I do? And is what I'm doing right now serving that purpose?
Good. So, David, for everyone having listened to us today, is there anything that you'd like them to know about you, where they can find you, what resources? You mentioned your latest book. Give us an insight on that.
The newest book, which will be out in August, is called The 5 Maturities. And so it's a model I developed to reimagine how we develop coaches. I'm really excited. I've been able to speak about that around the world and happy for that. And we run an organization called the Moment Institute, which has now transformed itself from a program center to a community of learners. And it's all going to be focused over the next couple of years around the new book and creating the new practitioner that includes but transcends coaching. And so you can just find us at themomentinstitute.com.
Well, thank you so much, David, for today's conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed. We could carry on for quite some time, I'm sure.
Yes.
But we'll let our listeners reflect upon what they've heard so far and invite them to continue listening to the next conversations. And hopefully all of these together are going to build something for them, coaches or whatever capacity they are listening to us in. And we're shifting a little bit that thinking and the paradigm for them.
I would just challenge us as coaches to not wait for other people to do this for us. And I think there's an opportunity for coaches to start, in some ways, demanding new things from their associations like this one, speaking of what's true and important to them, and banding together with other people with common interests and or visions for what's possible for coaching. And I feel like, again, one of the strengths of coaching is the extraordinary communities we've built. And I think this is an opportunity for them to band together to start creating the future for itself.
Absolutely. So let's see where this takes us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
You're welcome.
What I take away from this conversation is that AI is not only changing the tools available to coaches, it is holding up a mirror to the profession and asking us to examine our assumptions about our learning, development, relationships, and what people genuinely need from us. Perhaps our greatest responsibility is not to defend coaching as a familiar format, but to keep returning to its higher purpose and to develop the maturity, the discernment, and the humanity needed to serve that purpose in a changing world. I would love to hear what stood out for you. Please do share your takeaways on your preferred podcast platform or join the conversation through our LinkedIn posts. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To learn more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our website at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events for your continuing professional development.